Have you ever been on the receiving end of being a friend's second choice? What I mean by that is, have you ever asked a friend out on Friday night, maybe to go do something, or maybe it's to just come over and have a low-key Friday night at your house? But when they respond to your invitation, they don't really give you a straight answer, and maybe it's legit, but more so, you just get this vibe like they're just waiting to see if they get a better invitation before they respond to you. That never feels good, right? So often, that is exactly how we treat our stories, the stories of our lives, the tiny stories in our lives. We just assume they'll always be there for us to fall back on in case the quote unquote more fun plans fall apart. Our stories, the stories of our past and of the present, are more than just memories to enjoy and reminisce on inside of these passing moments on our way to the next big thing. So let's cultivate your 2020 stories right now. Consider this a mini planning workshop that's not all about the business and creativity and weight loss and lifestyle and home improvement goals that we tend to all gravitate towards when we're planning our year. I want to help you nurture your stories. So this episode is about the vitality of your stories. Enjoy. So have you started your 2020 planning? I can't decide if I'm calling 2020 or 2020. I can't really quite get with 2020, but it seems like most everybody else around me is saying 2020. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Each new year tends to bring a new set of goals for our businesses, our wellness, our relationships, home improvements, and so on and so on. We sort of start from this place of, what do I want to see happen? What do I want to see happen in my life in 10 years from now, 5 years from now, and most definitely in the next year? Well, 2020 is also a chance to start a new story with someone who matters. It's a chance to start a new tradition or to cultivate a story that's maybe been quiet or dormant in the background of your current life. It's a chance to heal from our ghost stories that we've carried with us for far too long. The idea for this episode came from two different places. Number one, in planning my own 2020 goals. It was like, here we go again, another set of goals. I have been doing the same goal planning process for several years now, and I still, don't get me wrong, I love planning my goals. I love being ambitious. I love planners and pens and all the workshops and things that come around at this time of year. It's energizing and it's fun, but simultaneously, I felt this almost tiredness and looking at how to make my life better. Because that's always the place that we start, right? We're always starting from this place of, how can it be better? Which kind of is like fueling that belief of lack that we might not realize we're believing, but we're kind of carrying that around with us. We're always trying to get better. We're always trying to improve. So that leads me to place number 2 that started the idea for this episode. As I reflected on 2019 and what made 2019 wonderful, and it was the experiences I had. I've got a whole list of experiences. If you are on either of my email lists for Fearless and Framed or Dangerously Good Stories, you've seen some of the things that we were up to in 2019. And even though I am absolutely not where I want to be in my business right now, and I am far from my peak fitness level, I'm not as patient of a mom as I'd like to be. I mean, I've got tons of flaws that I see in myself, and I do see in myself, but as I looked over my 2019 list of experiences that I had on my own, in my business, with my husband, as a family, with my friends, my extended family, so on and so on, I feel honestly fulfilled. And I didn't spend a ton of money. I didn't spend half of my year on vacation. I didn't travel abroad. I'm mostly talking about really simple experiences, all meaningful, and many stemmed from stories I've already experienced. In all of this, I was thinking about you, about my listeners and my readers, and how I keep hearing just how tapped out you are and how tired you are of living this hurried life. And it just gave me the idea to do this episode, because if you follow these steps, you will have your own beautiful list of 2020 experiences by the end of the year. This is completely separate than your typical goal setting. I have 8 goals for 2020 that have to do with my business and my wellness and all the things. My word of the year for 2020 is wellness. But this is just different. So it's, like I said, like a little mini workshop. I've got 5 steps that I'm going to walk you through in how you can nurture and cultivate your 2020 stories. So I hope that sounds good. Without further ado, let's just get right into it. As always, you can get the summary of this episode in the show notes. Go to dangerouslygoodstories.com/073. So step 1, you need to pull out a pen and a piece of paper, or an app that I have been sort of obsessed with lately since taking the Building a Second Brain course is Evernote. Brainstream all your stories of the past 5 years, or if you really want to spend some time here, go like way back. Go way back to your childhood. Just make a list of all the experiences that you've had. Don't read into them, just brainstream it all out on a piece of paper or on a blank page in your favorite app. So just to give you some ideas from my own life, and this is so basic. I have a much more robust list in that I call my tiny story list, but this just hopefully will just jog some ideas, because I don't want you to just think, oh, I need to look at my family life, or I need to look at my business world. Like, I want you to look at all areas of your life, all of the different relationships that you have, the different seasons that you've been through, everything. Just make a list of the stories. Just write one word or a few words or a full sentence at most to jog the story. You need to, when you look at these few words, you know the full story, even though the full story is not written out. This is not you trying to journal out every single story, just a simple list. Brainstream your stories of the past 5 years or more. So for me, I wrote down like 2015, I did a lot of early evening walks with the kids in the wagon. I pulled them in one of the, what are they called? Radio flyer wagons we got from my parents one year. I opened my first online course that year, Mastery Moment Seekers. I went to Hawaii to do a photography mentorship that I conducted. It was such an honor and a privilege to do that. In 2016, Levi's symptoms of ADHD were emerging. This was one of my hardest years in motherhood. I begged Dave to find a way to be home more. I took the kids up north to my parents' cabin by myself for the first time that year. In 2017, we moved to South Carolina, and I felt some genuine closure on leaving Michigan. In 2018, I had my second and the successful surgery for my endometriosis. Dave was with me always through all of that. That was like a very vivid memory that popped up. I took the kids to Michigan for 3 weeks that year. We went looking for deer, which was something that I used to do in my childhood. We would drive around on all the dirt roads looking for deer, and like I loved it. It was thrilling. So I did that with the kids that year. It was wonderful, the whole trip to Michigan, until I left after a sudden conflict with my mom. And then I wrote for 2019, that I decided for 2019 to just dive into some of the troubling spots of where I'm at. With good reason. You'll get this later on. So 2019, I'm really worried about my cortisol levels right now. The stress, I don't know. I'm not a medical person, so I'm just worried that I've got a lot of stress in my body right now. I had another conflict with my mom. For the first time, the rock solid partnership that Dave and I have didn't feel as rock solid for a season, as he was literally like working too much over the course of about 3 months. And it felt like we were passing ships in the night. And it just, I mean, our partnership was still there, but it just like that connectedness in a marriage wasn't quite what it could be. So those are just a few examples. I know I just sort of overloaded you with a bunch of different tiny stories, and I could have went way deeper. I could have went way back earlier than 2015, but I don't, like, this isn't about me. I want you to make this list for yourself. The secret is to make this an ongoing list that you add to. If you get nothing else from this episode, it is this. Start a list of the stories that you have lived in your life, of your experiences. You don't have to full on write out the stories, but just a few words or a sentence to bring the story front of mind. The good stories, the not so good stories, all of it. The stories that are hard, the stories that hurt, the stories that you've carried with you and you want to let go of them, the stories that you just are clinging on to and you're sad that they ended, all of it. You want to have, like, at the end of this, a bird's eye view here. This is part of the work that we will be doing in my program, the Tiny Story Society, in 2020. Learn more about that at dangerouslygoodstories.com/society. So that's your first step. Make the list. All right, you can continue listening, but you need to have a good list started before you move on doing the work. Step 2 is look for the stories you want to keep alive in some way. I'm not necessarily talking about manufacturing a new story that's like a replica of an old story. It's not like creepy like that, but maybe there is a way that you can breathe new life into a story, whether it's maybe something you did in your childhood and now you're giving that experience to your kids, or maybe it's just for yourself. Maybe it's something that you want to bring back into your life because you look at this list and you see an old story that just made you feel like you were thriving in your life. So a big example from my life, and this is like a huge thing, and I don't expect any of you to do such a thing, but there were all these little breadcrumbs that reminded me of my love of nature. And I mean, that love was always there. I knew it was there, but I didn't realize how big of a role it played in my childhood stories until I really looked back at my stories. So I used to spend a lot of time up in the apple trees. I used to, my parents had a bunch of fruit trees in their backyard. I used to fill up a bucket, go up there, sit for hours, have snacks, stuff to read, stuff to write. I'd go play with a cousin at her house. Her house backed up to a bunch of state land, and we would just be gone for hours out in the woods, climbing trees, having picnics up in trees, things like that. As you know, I have a big love for my family cabin, and the list goes on. And I realized just how happy being in the forest makes me. So long story short, that's honestly like one of the biggest sparks for the idea to move to South Carolina in 2017, and more specifically to buy the house that we are in here. I mean, we don't have a ton of property, but we've got enough property, and it's all in the woods on a literal mountain on 10 acres. So that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have looked back at all of my past wonderful stories and realized how important they were. So what, like, you see, like, I didn't literally go out today and climb apple trees and all the things I used to do as a kid, but I could see how similarities, the synchronicities in the stories could fit into my life today. Another example is when I took the kids back to, not back, well, yeah, I guess back to the cabin in 2016. Prior to 2016, I had taken the kids up to the family cabin, but it was with my parents, it was with Dave, and Levi was a baby. So 2016 was a big year because he was out of that babyness, and it was such a wonderful experience. They had never been up north to the point where they realized exactly where they were, and like the wonder, the curiosity and the wonder in their eyes was just awesome. So I could just look at that experience of the cabin. We've been going every summer thereafter since 2016. And the first thing I could put on my 2020 calendar is a trip to the cabin. And then I could go a layer deeper if I wanted and decide the experiences I want to have within that cabin experience. So, for example, before 2016, I can't remember if it was 2014 maybe, I don't remember, but my family and I went on a rafting trip. And it was my dad, there were a couple cousins, and Dave, Kendall, my sister, and her husband. But my mom stayed behind at the cabin with Levi because he was kind of little. And I thought about how this year I want everybody to go. My kids, both of them, are definitely old enough. So that is something. And again, it's coming from a place of looking back at past stories. So back to you, what stories on your list do you want to see live on in 2020? Maybe it's not in the exact same way as you experienced it the first time, but what can you add to your calendar or to your life in 2020 that's inspired by a past story that you just loved that you got to experience? Building on with step 3, now I want you to look at the stories you predict to happen in 2020. You might be able to use the list that you created in step 1 as part of a guide, but what I like to do is go through the year month by month in a future pace writing exercise. So what you'll do is you'll pretend it's January 2021 and you're writing about 2020. Now, other people might ask you to do this exercise and you're looking through the things that you've accomplished in the year. I don't want you to do that here. I want you to literally just look at the stories that happened in 2020. This exercise helps us to anticipate the stories that might lay ahead. And of course, there's unexpected stories that are going to arise. That is inevitable. But think of the stories that are happening in your life now that may end in 2020 and the stories that may begin in 2020. And I'll be honest with you, putting you on the spot thinking about this stuff is actually really freaking hard. But do it anyway. Go through it. Don't just try to get this done in 5 minutes time. Really think about it. Think about the people in your life. Are you worried about anyone's health? What lives might be reaching a new season, like the people in your life. For example, I know someone going through a divorce. I know someone likely to get engaged in 2020, and I have a cousin who's about to have her first baby. Seasons change for the people that we love as well. And if we take a step back and acknowledge what's going on with our own lives and the stories of the people that we love, it's really cool because then we can just really be intentional about how we show up for those other people as well. So as you grow a list of likely stories to happen in 2020, stories of your own and stories for the ones you love, decide how you want to experience those stories. Do you want to rush through some of them? And certainly, I think there's a lot of messaging around that's telling us to slow down, but certainly it is a valid option. If there is a valley that you're going to walk through in 2020 that you just want to rush through, look for opportunities to distract yourself and decide on that intention that you're just going to go into it head first and just get through the thing. Who do you want to show up for? How do you want to show up for them? Do you just want to send a Facebook message to somebody's on somebody's birthday, like a typical little, the Facebook birthday thing pops up and you want to say happy birthday? Or do you want to pick up the phone and give them a phone call? And I'm going to give a big shout out to my friend Kalila Hall, who completely surprised me calling me on my birthday in early November. I hadn't talked to her in quite a while, and to see her name pop up on my phone just meant so much. What stories do you think are happening in 2020 that you really want to savor this year? Are there stories of your past that you feel like you kind of rush through them and you don't want to rush through them? You want to really feel them and enjoy them? Acknowledge those. Are there stories that you want to record in 2020? Look at even just the tiny details of your day-to-day life. Maybe it's something that you expect to happen when you show up at your in-laws' house or at school or wherever. What stories are likely to happen in October? What stories are likely to happen in April? Write those down so that you can watch for them and be prepared to record them in a way that you feel good about, and so that you could also enjoy the experience as well. Or maybe there's something else. Maybe there's another intention you want to set for certain experiences. But look at the stories. Start with the stories. Start with the stories you predict to happen in 2020, and how can you set intentions around how you want to experience those. Step 4, you can go back to your list that you made in step 1 and also your list of predicted stories for step 3, and look for the stories you want to heal from. I won't pretend to be a therapist or a healing expert here, so I'll just tell you a few things that work for me. Well, I'll tell you, first of all, what doesn't work for me is just letting a story in my life, especially one that I feel really hurt by, just stew inside of me and try to suppress it and forget it. That just doesn't work. It comes up. Sometimes there are stories that keep me up at night that I think about and stress over. And I, a few years ago, just realized like how powerful we are to get through those stories. And again, feel free, actually, this is point number 3. I'm jumping ahead. Get outside help, get a mentor, get a friend, get a therapist, whatever you got to do if you can't get through it on your own. But one of the things that I learned was just how powerful writing is. So this is number 1 in a few things that work for me to heal from my own stories. I write about my feelings around a story, on what happened and how it affected me and how I feel and what I believe. I write about how I see from the other person's shoes, like if it has to do with a conflict, tearing apart different contexts of how I see the person and putting this, the whole story into another context is really helpful, which I'll share an example in just a sec. Asking, what does this mean about me? If I reacted this way, what does this mean about me? Or if they did this, what does this mean about me? On any given situation, look at that, because so often we don't want to be perceived in a certain way. I learned this from Susan Ferraro's program, Easy Money, which I'll link to in the show notes. So for example, I don't want to be perceived as a mean person or a bully or like a daughter who doesn't honor her parents. I'm not a very religious person in general, but I do know that one of the 10 commandments is to honor your parents. So I could, even though my mom and I love her dearly, we butt heads a lot. And I could never just cut her out of my life. I couldn't do that. If you have cut somebody out of your life for one reason or another, zero judgment. It is a personal choice, something that I could never do. So I wouldn't want certain things to be true about me. And when I write about all of this stuff and almost have a conversation with myself through my writing, things pop up and come out of me that are from a totally different angle or from a totally different place than where I started. And I can get to the root of my fears. You can determine your beliefs. You can play the what's the worst that can happen game. And so often doing these little writing techniques can really help us heal from stories that we are carrying forward, that we want to let go of, that we just haven't been able to for one reason or another. The clarity from writing is so powerful. So I will link to a couple sources in the show notes, dangerouslygoodstories.com/073 on how to heal from your stories through writing. But the one thing I want you to know is you don't even have to share it with anyone. And sometimes letter writing, like writing a letter to somebody, or even maybe it's not even a person, maybe it's just a certain season of your life, like, and you treat that season like it was a person and you write a letter to that person, or write a letter to God or whatever you believe in. It is so incredibly powerful just to express yourself. And you don't even have to share it with anybody, but just to get it out of your system feels amazing. So the other way that that helps me heal from stories is to do the hard thing and face the fear or the conflict, like face on, dead on. Have the hard conversation. Do the scary thing. Trust that your relief is on the other side of the hard action. It might not be sunshine and roses on the other side, but maybe you'll find yourself an opportunity to finally feel good about completely letting go or forgiving, or you just have more conviction in your own decisions, or whatever the case may be, because obviously there's a ton of different ghost stories that we've carried with us. So, and again, just the third suggestion is get outside help, a friend, a mentor, a therapist, etc. So I promised when I was talking about tearing apart different contexts so that I could see in another context, I'd give you an example. So I've already done like work on my relationship with my mom, for example. And one thing I've done is really like torn down that context of her just as my mom and started to look at her just as a woman, as a daughter, as a human herself. And this has really helped me move when we're in a conflict and I'm feeling angry. It's helped me move to a place of compassion instead. So I hope that that's helpful. What stories could you heal from in 2020? And what's your first step in trying to heal? Okay, final step, and this one is so much fun. It's look for the stories that can elevate a relationship. So go back to your list from step 1 and even your list in step 3 and look for stories that can elevate a relationship. Like literally look at the stories that made an impact on your life. Who could you say thank you to for showing up during that time, or for making that possible, or for teaching you something? So an example from my own life, this was something I started to do here in 2019. So I previewed earlier that Dave and I had a bit of a struggle in this year because of his work schedule changes. And I have always taken great pride in the strength of our marriage. All of our friends have always sort of like verbally told us that they envy our marriage. We've got a really strong marriage, honestly. We've had a beautiful friendship as the foundation, the excitement for one another, whether it's like I see that he is calling me on my phone, or he is pulling up the driveway after work, or maybe I just lock eyes with him when we're at a gathering. Like that excitement level has always been really high. But our distance in 2019 kind of made us butt heads and things felt really hard. I felt like I was doing a lot of parenting alone, and I felt like I wanted to be taken care of in more ways than he was able. Now, to be clear, when I say that he was, more ways than he was able, he wanted to, but he's not superhuman, right? And he was working really long hours. Like there were some times where he would work like 3 weeks straight, like just crazy stuff like that. It is absolutely wild how something as seemingly simple as a work schedule can rock all kinds of feelings. But anyway, so back in July, and I think I might have shared this story on the podcast in a previous episode, but I can't be sure. I started to elevate our relationship in 2019 before this whole boat was sort of rocked. I decided to write a letter to him. I hadn't written a letter to him since like we were dating back in 2007. I wanted to write him a love letter. My intention was to give it to him on our wedding anniversary, but I ended up using it, giving it to him much sooner, sort of. I'll get there. I'm not talking a Shakespeare letter or a graphic romance like novel type letter. This was a letter of how I see him. It was fueled by the stories of who he is, the stories of our memories. I got super specific in this letter, and it came in handy on the cusp of all of the changes in our schedules that were happening, when all these feelings of like not being supported and not being appreciated and all of these things started to rise up. And it was a total beautiful surprise when I read it to him after he basically accused me that I don't appreciate him. I mean, that's just how he was feeling in the moment. That letter would not have had the same effect had I wrote it after he told me I didn't appreciate him. But pulling that thing out in the middle of that conversation, holy, was it my saving grace. It was proof he could believe in, because there wasn't an agenda behind it, right? It came from it came from a good place, not from a place of needing to save my own butt. You know what I mean? So something I'm thinking about in 2020, and this is a total secret, and I am just so honored and privileged that I have this podcast in this space to sort of gab about what my plans are, because I know Dave doesn't listen to this podcast, but my marriage is my most important relationship. So one way I'm elevating that in actually very early 2020 is in hiring someone to do a wedding vow renewal for us. And it'll be a total surprise. So I'm hoping it'll happen. It's not totally set in stone yet. I've connected with someone who's interested. So I'll let you know in the new year how it all plays out. But I just thought, like, after what we've been through and the fact that we're coming up on our 10-year wedding anniversary, I just thought it would be so cool to totally surprise him on our little Moss Mountain, to just recommit to one another for another 10 years and beyond. Just us and the kids. I think it'd be really cool for the kids to witness this. No other guests, nothing fancy. I am not even going to dress up for this, but I just picture him coming home from work and having this person here to run the little ceremony for us. Just us. It's something that's like 15 minutes or less, like just ridiculously simple. But I think that like it would just be a nice gesture, right? So the thing that how this ties back to my old stories is that what I requested with this guy who's supposed to do this ceremony is that I want whatever he says to be fueled with our stories. So it feels almost like a trip down memory lane and something that we get to share together. So back to you. What relationship would you like to elevate? It does not have to be a grand gesture, like some kind of a ceremony like I'm doing, but it could start as simple as writing a letter of how you see somebody else using the stories that you've shared together. You could just say thank you. Who would you most want to make feel seen, valued, and unconditionally loved in 2020? What's one thing you could do to make that happen? Add that to your 2020 calendar. So that's it. A quick recap. Step 1, make a list of all of your past stories. Start small. You can go back the last year, 5 years, but if you want to go big, go all the way back in time. Step 2, out of those stories, look for the stories you want to keep alive in some way and decide how you can do that in 2020. Step 3, make a list of your 2020 predicted stories and decide in advance how to experience them. Step 4, look for the stories you want to heal from. And step 5, look for the stories that can elevate a relationship. All of this is summarized on dangerouslygoodstories.com/073. But can you already see, just in hearing this, how managing our stories plays a key role in the vitality of our stories? I mean, if you think about it, so often when we're remembering an old story, when we're thinking about a memory, it's happening in such a fleeting moment. And then the next moment, we're back to our life, back to our to-do lists, back to our goals. And we just sort of let those opportunities sizzle out. But it doesn't have to be that way. Can you see how different approaching 2020 can look when we don't dive into the typical, what do I want to see happen in my business? What do I want to improve type goals? I know my listeners pretty darn well. So I know, like me, I'm totally raising my hand here, that self-improvement is ingrained in you. It's wonderful because it makes you the maker that you are. But if it's all we look at and it's like sort of becomes this habit of just the thing that we gravitate towards, we miss beautiful opportunities to bring meaningfulness into our lives, into our relationships, and even into the things that we make. If you loved this episode, this is just the tip of the iceberg of the kind of activities we are doing together all throughout 2020 for a full year in my new program that is open right now, the Tiny Story Society. You can learn more about that at dangerouslygoodstories.com/society. But to give you a little preview, the Tiny Story Society isn't a totally brand new thing. I mean, it sort of is because I've never ran it in this capacity before. But what it is the iteration of my former program, the Preservation Project, that was only 6 weeks long. One thing I kept hearing from people who did that was they'd get a few months out of the program and they're like, oh, I need to bring this back into my life. But they had just kind of gotten back into status quo. I mean, sounds normal, right? So 6 weeks just wasn't long enough. So I've packaged this into a 52-week plan for us to do activities. Think activities that'll take you 15, 30 minutes a week. I mean, you can find an extra 15 minutes in your week to look at your stories and use them for good, right? Activities that are much like the exercise you heard today. We can do that together once a week throughout 2020. I created the Tiny Story Society because at the end of the month process, think about your end of the month process. It tends to look the same. We reflect on what happened. We look at what didn't happen, and that seems to be really freaking loud, and we prepare for the next month. We basically carry over what didn't get done, add it to the next month, and we feel like we're on this endless to-do list cycle, not to mention all the noise that's in our brains, and so many of the things that we say we want to do, the things that are really important. And I'm not talking about taking up Pilates or going on some trip, but I'm talking about these tiny, quiet, meaningful bits, like pausing to say thank you to a loved one or to nurture our stories. They tend to get put to the bottom of our to-do list time and time again. So I think this process is good for our creativity and our businesses, meaning the what happened, what didn't happen, and all of that. We have to acknowledge those questions. I'm not saying don't go there, but alongside of that, I want to hold us accountable to prioritize meaningfulness by hosting monthly Slowdown sessions inside of the Tiny Story Society. So these are like guided meditations without the cheesy music, much like what I've called you to do in this episode today. We'll focus on the meaningful people, places, and stories of our lives all throughout the year. Since I know I've got a lot of documentarians listening, to be clear, this is not about documenting. You might document inside of this, but it's not the central focus. I want you to think bigger. This is about personal story management. It's about nurturing, honoring, and benefiting from your own unique superpower, which is your stories. By the end of 2020, that list you created in step 1, you'll have a much bigger, tiny story list that'll make you feel nothing short of fulfilled when you look at it. No matter how behind you might feel on your goals and in life, this list is going to make you feel fulfilled when you see it. I guarantee it. This list will be a well for you to draw from, to spark new stories, to do all the things that we did in this exercise today. And for those of you in business, this is a way for you to make your brand more personal by sharing these stories with your business audience. And I know you might be thinking, wait, what? How can I share my personal life in my business when it has nothing to do with my business? And included in the Tiny Story Society is a new guide that I'll be creating in 2020 that will walk you through exactly how to do just that. So if you felt a bit depleted and tired of the status quo, and you are an ambitious, family-centric creative, the Tiny Story Society was created just for you. So this is a call to push the pause button on survival mode in 2020. You will pause and discover your dangerously good stories. We'll untangle all of them and find stories that can change everything. Go to dangerouslygoodstories.com/society to join me. Enrollment will close by the end of December, and this will not open again until December 2020. Thank you so much for listening. If you celebrate, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and all my love and wishes for whatever else you might celebrate this season. Thank you so much for listening. I'll talk to you soon.